This is Jazz Casual. I'm Ralph Gleason, and you've been listening to the piano of Earl Fatha Hines. And it's a very great moment for us to have him here with us because Earl Fatha Hines is really the father of jazz piano and one of the most important musicians who has ever played this music. And today you really can't play jazz piano without playing a little bit of Earl Fatha Hines. Earl, welcome to Jazz Casual.
Well, I'm glad to be here, Ralph, and thanks for that wonderful introduction.
Well, you know, I mean it, and you deserve it, and we all know this.
Yeah,
I've been wondering for many years about someone that's had such a great influence as you've had on jazz piano playing. How did you start playing yourself? Were you interested in jazz as a youngster, or?
No, Ralph, actually, I started as a concert master. I wanted to be a concert master as far as piano was concerned because I came from a musical family. And my dad played cornet at that time. My mother played an organ. We didn't have a piano.
Yeah.
And then I had an uncle that was very talented as far as all of the brass instruments. So when my mother used to play the organ, I used to get some newspaper and put it on the chair, and I'd imitate her playing music, sheet music. So she found that out, and immediately she changed the organ into a piano, and I started playing the piano from there. Well, of course, naturally, I had to start up from the bottom up because my dad insisted that I never play no music by ear. He said, if you're going to play this piano, you're going to learn it like you should learn. So that's when I started out, actually.
You were studying classical music then?
I was studying classics then. In fact, I majored in school in music.
How did you get interested in jazz?
Well, I tell you what happened. After playing for so long, I happened to run across a fellow by the name of Lost Depp who was in at that time, in the entertainment world. And he was singing in nightclubs. Although he was a fellow that was singing light classics, he had a lot of trouble in finding somebody to play music that was written. Everybody that he had accompanying him was played by ear.
Yeah.
So naturally, and the last two fellows that he found only had two keys that he could play in, see? So he was very much discouraged. And walking downtown one day, I had a little boy that was playing drums with me, as kids do in teenagers. And so he ran across me and he said, how would you like to have a job? I said, well, I don't know. I'm going to school. He said, well, this is at night. You can work at night a couple hours. And so I said, well, I don't mind. I said, if you take my drummer, you know. So he said, well, I'll take both of you. So he says, well, I'll pay you $12 a week, both of you $12 a week, and your meals and board, you know. And so I thought about that I don't know how long. And I went home and told my parents. So in the meantime, I had an opportunity to come to that same particular spot and heard a piano upstairs. And I didn't know, it sounded awful strange, but it had a nice beat to it. I said, oh, I'd like to see what he's doing, you know. So finally, I insisted on them take me upstairs. And they took me upstairs, and I sat down, and a little short fellow there, sort of humpback, and he was playing a little thing called Squeeze Me. I'll never will forget it. And he was singing the lyrics to it, and I said, now that's what I want to do, see? So I didn't know how in the world I was going to go about it because I didn't know how to get into that type of music. So later on, I ran across some guys that I'll be telling you about when I get to the piano because I think I can demonstrate more than I can by telling you, you know.
But this was the first jazz music you'd ever heard?
That's the first jazz music I ever heard, you know. I never knew there was such a thing existing because my dad was so strict with me with this classical music until I better not play something that, you know, so unless it was a march like he was playing with the band, you know, those things were very unusual to do.
But you were looking forward to a career then in classical music?
I really was. I was very much interested. I really wanted to do it because, I don't know, there was just something about, I guess it's because coming from a musical family, and as I said before, there were so many people around me that was into it. My auntie was in light classic singing, so that's all I heard, you know.
But you told me once, I remember, that you also at one time had wanted to play the trumpet.
Yes.
Was this before you played the...
Well, the reason I was going to demonstrate that. That's why I said when I get to the piano, so many little things I'd like to demonstrate over the piano to show where I got that trumpet style from is that my dad playing cornet, and I wanted to play an instrument like that too. I figured, well, it doesn't hurt me to play cornet and play piano too. So, but I had a way of, after I began to learn what jazz was, I had a style that I wanted to use, you know, and I said, well, this trumpet will do it, this cornet at that time. So I picked the horn up, and they didn't have the modern way of playing the trumpet now. And I just started blowing, and it hurt me behind my ears. Oh, I said, I can do better than that. I couldn't go through that. You know what I mean? So as I advanced in piano and in jazz, well, then I said, well, what I wanted to do on that trumpet, which is trumpet now, is cornet then, I said, I'll do it on piano. See, and that's how I got that. They gave me that name of trumpet style piano. See.
Well, now, would you show us some of the styles of the people that influenced you and that you listened to when you started out, and then tell us about how the piano was developed down through the years? And
well, I'll go back as far as I can.
Right.
I hope I can. I just hope I can picture these things as I saw them as, from a teenager up. You know.
Yeah.
And,
that would be fascinating. I'd love to hear that.
Okay.
All right.
All right. That's fine for me.
Thank you.
All right.
We'll have a chance now to listen to one of the inventors of jazz piano show us some of the things that have influenced him down through his career as he developed as a jazz musician and bring the piano up to date. And one of the things that I want to point out here, because Earl is really too modest to do this, is that he's always remained very interested in every aspect of jazz music, listening to new players and having them with him in his bands from time to time. He's accompanied by Earl Watkins on drums and Johnny Green on bass, and Earl Fatha Hines on piano.
That was just a little light touch of what they used to do years ago called ragtime. Of course, I can't actually go through it as much as I heard because, well, I just didn't care for that particular style. I was playing classics at that time. But that was what they call a single bass. And that's all you had, just a single bass on it. And then later on, as I began to get into jazz, I ran across a couple of fellows that were working in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And as I happened to mention just a few moments ago that I was getting $12 a week. So I ran across one fellow that had a terrific left hand. And later on in the mornings, I used to sit and listen to this fellow. And he would play, and it sounded so much like an organ, I didn't think a person could get that much out of piano. But tenths meant that that's the first, that's the bass, that's the third, that's the fifth, and as you stretch, that's 10. They call that tenths. And here's the way he used to play his left hand. Isn't that pretty? That's what happened during those days. And of course, in order for me to interest this fellow, because he didn't know anything about me, why, he had a habit of, particular beer, which I will not call the title of the beer, but anyway, and tobacco. And so I used to spend my little change and buy him that. And then I ran across another fellow that had a terrific right hand. His name was Johnny Waters. He was doing the same thing in the right hand. He was carrying the melody. In the right hand. And he used to like a certain type of gin and some Camel cigarettes. So I split my salaries up between those two fellas. And with what I had learned as far as classics were concerned, it came out something like this. Well, then we used to play dances by myself. In fact, I played a whole dance. They used to come to me with club organizations, what have you, and say, "Lee, you want to play a dance?" I said, "Sure." Well, during those days, we didn't have a musicians union. And the only way the musicians used to get work was because we'd go home in the evening and dress up and stand on the street, and people used to pick us up off the streets. Is the piano player here? Is the drummer here? Well, of course, we was always dressed, you know. So I'd go out and play a dance. I'd play from 9 to 1, whatever price that I thought I was worth is what I got. Because if they didn't like what I did, I wasn't hired again. But anyway, we started to playing that way around the little neighborhood towns. And I began to get what you call a little strong because I had gained quite a bit of experience playing piano by myself. Then I heard such thing as a drummer coming around, you know what I mean? So I said, well, now that should add to the rhythm section. So we had drums added to it, and of course Earl Watson's going to demonstrate in a few moments. And then came the bass horn, which later on turned into a bass fiddle. And so we used to try to swing a lot of things. And I used to play like this. Well, then when I joined the bands, then they said, Earl, you got to slow your music down in order to play with an organization. So I heard a little fellow playing a tune one time in a club called Leader House, and the tune was called Squeeze Me, something like this. Later on, I got into the bands, and I found out that the band was so large and playing single like that, why, I couldn't be heard. So I brought to prominence that little thing called trumpet style, which meant I played octaves, so I could be heard through this big band, something like this. That note I was holding up there like this, that was when you used to hold a high note, you know, on the trumpet. Well, I didn't have the trumpet, so that's where I used the tremolo from, you see. So now let's bring in the drums. And during those years, we had a fellow by the name of Kaiser Marshall work with Fletcher Henderson, and he created a little style as far as drums is concerned. The first drums was just, they played just the straight two beats on the snare drum and the bass, something like Earl Watson's going to do right now. Now there's a little added to that, and Kaiser Marshall created this. Of course, at that time they had what they call a hand cymbal, but then they kind of improved it and brought it into what they call a foot cymbal, which is now known as a sock cymbal, and goes something like this with Earl. And after that, we run into what we call the bass horn. But when they brought the bands inside, why, then they brought in the bass fiddle. Of course, he was still using the same style that we're using then. Well, we used a little tune called Squeeze Me, and here's Johnny Green to show you how they played bass then when they first came inside. And they improved on the bass, and of course, later on, Johnny Green will give you an idea how they used to play. Now they're playing. In fact, it's the style that they're using. Well done, Johnny. And then we had what we call a boogie woogie came into style. Years ago, we used to, if you don't mind, I'm going to kind of take a little of this off of my face because it's running into my eyes. You don't mind that, do you? But we had a little boogie woogie style. And years ago, we used to call this banging on piano because we never thought there was anything to it because anybody could sit down and do this. Or people used to do that all hours of night, you know what I mean? We'd say, I wish them people would get up off of the piano and start banging so much, you know? Well, then later on, it came into vogue because John Hammond happened to see a couple of guys in Kansas City, two fellas that didn't read any music at all, but they had a good rhythm, and their rhythm was from that boogie. Boogie Woogie, and then came into style. And then at that time, I happened to run across a guy named Louis Armstrong, and we became very close friends because we were working at a place called the Sunset Cafe in Chicago. And Louis had an unusual style, and it's a style that I had wanted to play for many years. And when I saw Louis, I couldn't believe it because he was playing what I wanted to play. And of course, we used to have an awful lot of fun during the time at the Sunset Cafe. He would do something on his trumpet, and I would steal it and say thank you. And I would do something on the piano, and he would steal it and say thank you. That's the way we used to do. And I really did rave over his particular style at that time. And piano then began to get very prominent and very popular. And of course, I had an awful lot of feeling because I never did play anybody else's solo because I figured that if I did, why then I couldn't get the same idea that the guy that wrote the tune or actually played the tune would get out of that particular number. So I never did play it because I didn't want any comparisons, see? So I thought the best thing for me to do was just play the way I always felt from here, and that's the way I play today. I never try to repeat or try to memorize anything. I just play as I go along, and if you've heard me do something one night and come back the next night, if it's a little different, it's because that's the way I feel, see? Now, then came your modern piano playing. And some of these styles came out of my band. For instance, my wonderful friends, Dizzy Gillespie, Charlie Parker, and all those, they created a style that came from the actual music books. Fifths, 13ths, double augmented chords. That's an augmented chord. And now they have me doing the same thing. I'm playing a little blues. then. Well, that's one of the old tunes of this year that's put into a little bit of modern. I don't do too much of that way out stuff because, to tell you the truth about it, if I do, then some of my old-time friends will forget all about it and say, well, I don't know what he's doing. So let's pick the tempo up, fellas, and do a little Lovers Around the Corner and have some fun, and let's see what happens.